Hello everyone and welcome to The Gathering. This is Meryl and I will be narrating a story from family members of mine long since left this earth, but it's a story that's very famous in our family, passed down through the generations, and I'd like to share that story with you all. There's a beautiful love story that's been passed down through the family members, generation by generation. This story has always been told to all members of the family, and I would like to share this story with you. This story is about my great aunt and my great uncle, who are no longer with us. I refer to them always as aunt and uncle. And this is my aunt's story. This story began in the time period of 1915 to 1920 and onwards. So it is an old historical family story that is still spoken about today. My aunt went out to the mailbox one day, as she does every day, to collect the mail. She walked inside and started going through the mail when she saw an envelope that she did not recognise the sender. She sat down on her bed in curiosity and opened this letter. Inside was a letter, a 3-page letter, and also on a separate piece of paper was just a note in different handwriting. She first read the note that came with the letter, and all it said was, "Dear Mrs. Bennet, you do not know me, but I hope this letter finds you. You see, recently my son passed away, and after going through an old storage cupboard where his belongings were held, after he returned from the war, I came across his old kit bag. With tears in my eyes, I started going through the kit bag because it had never been touched since he returned home from the war with serious injuries, which eventually he died from those injuries. I know he always talked about his mate Bobby, and in this kit bag I found this letter, and it was to be addressed to you. It's very sad for me to have to send this on because so many years have passed, but I do hope it gets to you, and I hope it gives you some comfort. What had happened was, my son was best mates with your husband Bobby, and we all know that when the men go off to war, they usually give a note or a letter to their mate to send back to their loved ones at home if anything happens to them. And this is obviously what Bobby has given my son. My son was severely injured in the war. He spent 12 months overseas in hospitals and rehabilitation centres, and eventually he came home. Years passed, and he never ever regained his strength or his health from these serious injuries, and eventually succumbed to them. That was when I went to the storage shed and found his old kit bag that had been put in there on his return and forgotten about. Please accept my apologies in the delay in sending this letter to you. It gives me much sadness that it has taken so long, but I hope you find some comfort and joy. My aunt had tears rolling down her cheeks, and with shaking hands she opened the letter. And it was indeed a letter from her beloved husband Bobby. The shock was more intensified and startling because her beloved husband Bobby had died in the war 20 years before. My aunt and uncle met when they were young. They married very early, bought their first home, and then he was called away to war. They had one of those rare, beautiful, deep loves for each other. Their whole world revolved around each other. Uncle Bobby always said to my aunt, no matter what the conversation, he always walked in the door and said, "Darling, I love you." And then he would continue a conversation with her. When he was leaving the house, he would always say, "Darling, I love you." In all his letters that he wrote to her when he was away fighting, the letters always began with, "Darling, I love you," and he ended the letter saying, "It's just what he always said. When he woke up in the morning, when he was home on leave, he would always say, 'Darling, I love you.'" Uncle Bobby kept a diary when he was away fighting. He'd write it out in his little notebook, his day-to-day activities, what was going on, the fear that he had, the sad loss of his buddies, and he would just write everything down each day in his journal so that when he got home he would have the memories of the good times that he had with mates that he had lost. Before my aunt and uncle were married, money was very scarce in those days and he wanted to give her something special. So he made her a little wooden jewellery box. He varnished it, put a little clasp on it and handed it to her. This is where she kept all his letters that arrived, sometimes daily, sometimes weeks would go in between before she received a letter. It depended where he was stationed at the time. This box, which is known as Uncle Bobby's box, and his diary had been passed down to family members, and I was lucky enough to receive Uncle Bobby's box and the diary I still have in my possession. I will be showing some excerpts from the diary in this story. Too many pages to put everything in, but just so you can see what these brave young men went through to fight for our country. My aunt kept that wooden box on her side table, and every night before she went to sleep she would put her hand on it and she would say, "Darling, I love you." She was anxiously awaiting his next shore leave, and she was so excited to be able to meet him at the train station. But sadly, before that happened, she had 2 military men arrive at her door to give her the sad news that he had been killed in action the night before. They handed her an official letter, and to say that her shock was deep and profound is an understatement. My aunt never did get over the death of her beloved Bobby. She remained in the same house that they purchased before he went off to war. Over the years, she changed the furniture, but the one thing she never would change was the bed. She lived to a very old age in that same house and slept in that same bed, and every night before she went to sleep, she would put her hand on the top of Uncle Bobby's box and say, "Darling, I love you." When my aunt was handed the diary that Uncle Bobby had written in diligently every day, she knew that over the years the ink would fade. So a family member had it typed out exactly how he wrote it, and that's how it's been able to remain in the family for all these years. I have that box, Uncle Bobby's box. That is where she placed the letter that she received from this stranger. Until the day she died, that letter remained in Uncle Bobby's box. I received the box. I received the typewritten diary. But when my aunt passed away, Uncle Bobby's last letter that arrived 20 years later, and his original diary in his own handwriting were put in the casket with her. My aunt was told some time later, after receiving this letter from this stranger, who she was so thankful to, they actually started writing to each other and formed a friendship. It turned out that the night that he wrote this letter was the night he was killed. He had handed the letter to his mate, whose mother then sent it on to my Auntie Ida. Of course, the story is a lot more involved. The portion of the letter that I'm going to read out is only a portion. It's a very personal, private letter, but I will read out a portion of it. And I hope you've enjoyed a part of the history from my family and the beautiful love story that began back in 1913. Thank you. And now, to finish my story, I will read out just a very small portion of the last letter from Uncle Bobby to Auntie Ida. Hello, sweetheart. I'm hoping my letter brings a smile to your beautiful face as I smile while I am writing it. It was a long, tiring day today. None of us were able to get any sleep with the mortar and gunfire. It was going off all night long. The nights are the worst, and we do what we can to keep our morale up. Of course, I always think of you. Johnny was hit last night and not expected to make it. He's barely a lad and should never have been here. We're hoping the news is good, but I feel it won't be. We have lost so many. Now, I don't want you to worry. I'll be home with you before you know it. I miss you every minute of the day. I cannot wait to be home in your arms, not to mention a scrumptious home-cooked meal. How's the family? Are you taking care of yourself? We play a bit of rugby when we can to keep our spirits up. I should have news very soon about my leave. As I sit here and write, I feel so at peace. The sky is a brilliant blue after a night filled with gunfire and smoke. It must be because I am thinking of you. I have to go now, my love, as Sarge has sent for us. I'll be writing again soon. Until then, you always know. Darling, I love you. Your Bobby. One thing that always stood out to me as I reread this letter over the years many times was the last letter he wrote before he was killed. He was saying how at peace he felt and how the sky was so blue after a night of horrendous battle, smoke, gunfire. I'm wondering if he knew that this may be the last letter to his beloved wife, and that it would be the last time he would ever say, "Darling, I love you."